Our next panelist is our Miss Nwabisa Makunga, excuse me. She is the editor of the Sowetan. She is also on the executive committee of the management and executive committee of SANEF. Welcome, Nwabisa. Great to see you.
Sure. Thank you very much. I mean, colleagues, hi. I hope you can hear me. Angie, I thought that was absolutely excellent. Thank you very much. I actually, while listening to you, I was like, this is why I loved, for pretty much most of my life, covering local government, not just the elections, but essentially the story of local government. So thank you very much for reminding us again of not only why it's an exciting thing to cover, but why it's so important, for our careers, but also for so my brief was really to talk about, print and I suppose storytelling as far as print is concerned. And I mean, I want to move away from the brief if the colleagues will allow me, because I don't necessarily believe in a platform-specific approach, when it comes to covering news and in telling our stories. While platforms are obviously important are the spaces on which we share our journalism. But I think, with the evolution of particularly of digital and the media, we realize that, for example, a platform like print is no longer one that is, the of our storytelling. So I'd like to really talk about, and echoing a lot of what Angie has said, to talk about just some principles and some experiences as far as covering local government. So I come, Sbu the chairperson of SANEF, and I come from the Eastern Cape. And one of the things that Sbu often tells a story, and says, in South Africa, there is such a perception that the Eastern Cape, for example, is one of the most, is probably the most corrupt province in the country. And that perception is really created not so much because, it is so. I mean, there's definitely, major corruption down there. But I think it's because of the reportage, of it, and particularly reportage at a very, very local level, at a very granular level. And I think, unlike perhaps many parts of the country, that kind of, going deep into those details, it's not something that happens quite often. And for me, it's something that I think we should really begin a conversation about. How do we tell stories, at a local level in a way that not only resonate, but really kind of put a mirror, to our audience and saying, this is what our cities and our towns look like. If you just take a snapshot of our country, and we come into this election at a time where our country is pretty much dilapidated. It's really, really in ruins. I was having a conversation with a colleague this morning saying, oh, again, I woke up without water. And it's become one of those things that are kind of the norm. And the danger perhaps in recognizing that is in saying that, well, this is what it is today, is normalizing, the state of crisis that we're in. And I think as journalists, our role becomes far more important in trying to tell our story and asking the questions that Angie's saying we must ask about why this is so and who's going to do what about it. So I think Isak mentioned earlier, and I was quite excited when you mentioned your 4 Ps, because the first part of the point that I want to drive home is really what I thought was your first P. And for me, it's that local government and the elections are about people. We often fall into this trap of being very much centered around, political parties and while they are important. And yes, we should follow, what they're doing for purposes of accountability. But I think we should never actually move away, in as far as centering people and ordinary citizens, and some of them who are not citizens and residents, as the center of the story. So for me, this bottom-up approach is probably a far more effective one than a top-down approach. And I think to do that, we need to be able to be ourselves going into these communities. It's quite hard sometimes because obviously, I mean, any editor will tell you about the resources on the ground and how we are able to, how we are trying to do, far more with less, and how we're trying to stretch ourselves as much as possible. But I do think because that is so important that we do that, I think that the issue of planning becomes quite an important one. In every newsroom is probably the one thing that we need to be, priding ourselves, in doing. I think the idea of telling, people stories, as Angie, you put it quite nicely, it's really about, where do you live? What happens there? Why is the situation, the way that it is? For us to be able to ask those questions and really translate the experiences of people onto the platforms, on which we publish, and to be able to then ask, and moving forward to say, to ask questions of accountability. So why, I mean, if you look at many cities, there are squabbles everywhere as far as, leadership is concerned, and et cetera. And I think a lot of us as journalists will kind of get caught up in perhaps the excitement, I don't know if it is the excitement of telling the leadership squabble, but what is really the impact, of that? What is the impact of that, on not just revenue collection? What is the impact of that on our street? The condition of our roads, just our infrastructure, and who then gets to do what about it? There's a trend I think that I've seen in South Africa where people are beginning to do things for themselves, and the private sector I think has come on board. The challenge for me, while that is I suppose it's a good thing as far as active citizenry, the challenge with that is that you kind of you create this other parallel world where the people who we pay to actually fix the things that they're meant to fix, the basic things that they're meant to fix, get absolved, if you want to call it that, from doing so. And so we ourselves are beginning to take charge and saying, okay, let's do it. And for me, in our storytelling, we need to be quite nuanced in understanding, that why is that the case and who gets to do what about it. So the second thing I think I want to talk about is it's quite important, and with journalism, we always talk about journalism as a mechanism of truth, and I think it's important for us to understand deeper issues of fact checking. So while going beyond just fact checking as far as did I quote the person right, is their name correct, etc. But I think we need to be able to develop strategies where we are able to fact check, perhaps not even in real time. It would be perfect if we were to do it in real time, but where we are able to actually fact check, what politicians say, what people in authority say, just beyond that, and to look at what exactly is, the books are saying. So when a politician, for example, stands up and say, okay, right, so we're going to fix whatever kind of roads, or pointing to the other person to say this has not been done. What is really the situation, on the ground beyond what they're saying? What is the Auditor General's books are saying? What is the impact reports basically are saying? And to be able to juxtapose that, with what they say, with actually the reality on the ground, as well as the capacity, financial capacity, administrative capacity of the institutions that they want to lead. And I think part of the challenge that many of us have is really kind of doing hit and run journalism, where yes, we follow, the politician, we write what they say, or record what they say, and then we kind of move on. And that is basically what our journalism offers. And I think our audiences are wanting something far more nuanced, something far more of quality. They want to know that what so-and-so is saying is actually true or not true, because this is what the reality is as far as, administrative capacity. This is what the reality is as far as, the political context, as well as, what the municipality should be doing. And I think if we are able to arm ourselves with that kind of information, we'll be able to ask better questions and report with such authority on matters of local government. But that does need a lot of reading. It needs a lot of reading, and needs a lot of planning, and for us to really think long and hard about how we cover the places that we want to cover. And I think the third thing for me is, and it's really part of our experiences, particularly as female journalists, is we need to know how to propaganda-proof ourselves, if there is such a phrase. So in my experience, election time, and this happens, I suppose, all over the world, election time are really that particular time where, the biggest weapon that politicians or people vying for power, they have against each other is really propaganda. And obviously journalists, being leading the platforms that we do, we really sometimes get caught up, in that. And the question for me to ask is, how do we keep the main thing? While it may be interesting to kind of talk about all the political machinations that happen, yes, perhaps there are context, but how do we make sure that what we write is fact-checked, it is true, is reality, particularly in a time of fake news? And I think these are conversations we probably need to have, in the different newsrooms. And how do we? I think there is a webinar coming up from SANEF about particularly this kind of thing. And I think the important thing about it is that once you are able to, to cut through the noise, as it were, you're really able to tell a story in a way that is valuable, that your readers or your audiences may be able to follow and actually, tell their own experiences as far as it is concerned. And I think the other thing is, and just also kind of flowing from this issue of propaganda, is safety. I think many of us journalists, in particular female journalists, again, at the time when there are elections coming up, we become, targets for all sorts of attacks, whether it's attacks, yes, virtually, but also whether it's sometimes physical attacks. And a lot of journalists sometimes don't quite know how to navigate that. I think there is on our portal some tips on basically how to keep safe, as we are covering. But I think as a major theme, that is one of the things that we need to be able to be aware of and train ourselves to say, this is how we're able to navigate what it becomes a very, very dangerous terrain for many, particularly young. The point really for me, I think, is to understand in this coming up election, while every single time we cover elections, it happens at a time where there's high tensions and all of that. But I think for me, it's quite important for us to really try to keep the main thing, to really try to keep to cut through what is essentially the noise and understand, particularly because our country finds itself in the position that it is, to understand what it is that is our role. And our role is to tell a story, to mirror the experiences of people above the claims of politicians. Our role is to fact check what people are saying against the reality on the ground, against what is there, what is documented, in municipal records, etc. And I think our story is to be able to simplify those things and hopefully create an environment where people themselves are able to tell their own story. Hopefully create an environment where there are far more constructive conversations that are had about our local government than what we currently are facing now. Thank you, guys.